And that's it for me. Thanks, Lisa. Those were some fantastic examples. And so now we're moving on to our third speaker, Jennifer Fix. She's an associate of urban planning and design dialogue, where she works with communities of all shapes and sizes on plans for main streets, transit streets, waterfronts, neighborhoods, and entire cities. She integrates health and well-being into her work, including through her collaboration with Vancouver Coastal Health on a plan for a new whole health neighborhood at one of their complex care sites. Jennifer also led a team of consultants on the City of Abbotsford's official community plan process, which used metrics to measure the performance of different planning scenarios from the perspective of community well-being. She sits on the steering committee of the BC Healthy Built Environment Alliance. Her projects have been honored with Planning Excellence Awards from the Canadian Institute of Planners, Planning Institute of BC, and the Union of BC Municipalities. So I'll pass it off to you now, Jennifer.
Great, thanks Terry, and thanks Charito and Lisa for that wonderful presentation you provided. So I'm tackling the healthy built environment from a different perspective. I'm an urban planner, as was mentioned, by trade, and so I'll be drawing on a case study I did with the City of Abbotsford. That's their graphic running along near the bottom of the screen. But before I continue, I just want to acknowledge that I work at Dialogue. I'm based in the Vancouver studio, which is in the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. But I'm currently speaking to you from southern Saskatchewan and Treaty 4 territory and homeland of the Métis. So, you know, we talked a lot about in the last hour or 45 minutes around how the healthy built environment is increasingly part of discourse in planning and urban design, and, you know, wanting to draw those links across those two sectors. But what's interesting, and Lisa mentioned it, is that the origins of modern planning is actually rooted in health and health concerns. So this photo is taken by a fellow by the name of Jacob Rees in the late 19th century, and he took a number of photographs in tenement buildings around New York City, which housed a lot of newcomer workers. And he had a photo exhibition. It was entitled "How the Other Half Lives," showing the living conditions of people living in these homes. And of course, these were breeding grounds for a number of issues, including cholera, tuberculosis, and other diseases. And through this photo exhibit, there was a tremendous amount of public outcry, and with that, there were changes to legal frameworks, and the Tenement House Acts were put in place to regulate fresh air and light in these buildings, to establish courtyards for waste disposal, and soon these regulations extended to the realm of urban planning with laws surrounding parks and bathhouses. So this is really the birth of zoning. It all came from, in North America, and this really all came from concerns around health and well-being. So this next slide shows two images. Are people seeing, it's showing like it's a little bit bleeding off the sides of the page on my screen. Is that doing the same for others? Okay, well, I'll continue on. I think the slides do get smaller. The image on the left is an image of a World War II, just post-World War II suburb called Levittown in the U.S., and it's a perfect example of how, you know, runaway zoning, separating uses and creating low-density, single-detached residential neighborhoods became really prevalent in North America. And the image on the right shows a more modern satellite image of Calgary. And so this is a legacy that continues to live on and then has a number of health issues associated with it, which I'll talk about in a moment. So that we can ask the question, well, how does well-being today and health affect our cities? We heard a lot of wisdom from Charito and Lisa around this and all the wonderful research that went into the Healthy Built Environment Alliance Toolkit. But as I mentioned, want to talk specifically about one particular application, and that is with the City of Abbotsford's official community plan. So the City of Abbotsford is a municipality about 100 kilometers east of the City of Vancouver in the Fraser Valley. 140,000 people live there. And my firm Dialogue was engaged to develop a new official community plan. So this is an official community plan, or OCP is called in some provinces, development plans in other provinces, official plans. But essentially what it is a citywide, overarching umbrella policy document that provides overarching direction for everything from land use, so the location, the intensity, and the type of different uses, through to transportation and housing and open space, environmental protection, infrastructure, and so forth. So it's kind of the mother policy document, for lack of a better word, that sets into motion a series of more detailed plans and bylaws to which all of them must adhere to or align with the OCP. So it's a very powerful document. It's in fact one of the most powerful documents that dispose of local governments to shape change and meet community goals. So we were engaged by the city to lead a public engagement process and a planning process for their new OCP. And as a starting point, we launched a citywide community visioning exercise. And we asked the residents of the community, what do you want your city to look like when you reach a population of 200,000? So today we have 140,000 souls in the city of Abbotsford. So when 50,000 more people come, we grow to a population of 200,000, what should it look like? A lot of the responses and qualities provided to us by residents conjured up images like this. So we heard words like walkability, vibrancy, prosperity, public life, nightlife, transportation choices like walking and cycling, housing choices, interesting destinations, natural beauty, well-being. So these are words that were in fact driving our process, but they were not unlike a lot of the words and a lot of the descriptions and the vision statements found in past OCPs. So, but if you look at the current conditions in Abbotsford today, this is what you have. So there's a disconnect between what those vision statements and those lofty principles have been espousing for 2 to 3 plans ago to what we actually see on the ground today. And in fact, this image is showing the major east-west arterial that runs through the city, and this is actually the city center. And among all of the census metropolitan areas in Canada, Abbotsford is the most car dependent, with more than 90% of trips taken by the personal automobile. So, you can ask the question, why is there a disconnect between, the vision and the principles, aspirations of the community and what we actually see on the ground? Some will blame it on the developers, others on the politicians or on staff. But what we've heard in working with this community and in other communities is that in fact, the issue sometimes lies with the plans themselves. And there's a great saying from Michael Geller, he's planner turned developer in Metro Vancouver, and he says, hope is not a plan. So you can have these lofty statements, but you need to have really good, tangible policies and regulations that ensure that those visions get delivered. So the first step as part of this process, we heard from the community, and through our analysis, we understood that one of the most important things we had to do here was to shift away from auto-dependency. So as a starting point, we took stock of existing conditions, and looking at the research, we knew that getting people out of their cars into active modes of transportation, there were 3 really, really significant urban design attributes that drove that. And the first was density. Density, of course, refers to the intensity of uses in a particular area. So we can be talking about the number of residential units, we can be talking about population, we can be talking about employment. But density is important for many reasons. It creates body heat to support the mom and pop retail shops that allow people to get to destinations on foot. And it's also correlated with higher rates of active transportation and transit. So this graph is adapted from Jared Walker's book about transit. And I can see it, there we go. A little bit bleeding off the edge here. So we can see here that on the left side, the vertical, we have a transit demand, and then density on the horizontal, on the x-axis. So we know that generally speaking, we need about 32 people, residents per hectare, before we start seeing a significant shift away from automobile use, moving toward local bus service viability. And that most municipalities cite about a threshold of about 100 or so people per hectare before you start seeing frequent, reliable, good transit. And based on household size in Abbotsford, this is about a very minimum threshold of about 12 units or 12 homes per hectare. But if you look at the city of Abbotsford in terms of the density, you see that the average is 10.8. So it actually falls below this very basic threshold, and this is why we're seeing, pretty significant car dependency, and it's absolutely linked to urban design, in this case, density. So what we did is we mapped out population density within the city. So this is a heat map. So the warmer colors are showing the greater density of folks. The large dotted circle in the center is the city center. And what you can see here is that with the red, the deep red is starting to approach that threshold of frequent transit. And as you can see, the vast majority of the municipality is not providing the critical mass, the critical body heat needed to support good transit. Moreover, when you actually look at where people are working, you can see something here. So you've got, this is where people live, this is where people work. So you can see people are living and working in very different areas, which can also be problematic because, of course, it creates a situation where people are not able to travel to work really in any other way with the absence of good transit system than by car. So in Abbotsford, we had a situation where the average resident is driving about 8.7 kilometers to get to work because of this disconnect. So that speaks to density. The second piece that's really important in terms of correlation between active modes and urban design is destinations or land use mix. So here we're talking about diverse activities, commercial uses, institutional uses, industrial, residential parks, open space. And we know that residents living near multiple and diverse destinations are generally more likely to take frequent and shorter trips and by walking and cycling. And because land use mix can be difficult to measure, we use the proxy of grocery stores. And we chose the proxy of grocery stores because it's a top trip generator outside of work and school. It typically is an anchor for other destinations, other retailers. And it was identified as really important by the citizens of Abbotsford. We also know, not just in terms of active transportation, but grocery store access is really important to healthy diets, where we know that food deserts are often associated with high rates of obesity and chronic disease. So we looked at this, and we mapped out those little orange circles. So the dark orange dot represents existing grocery stores, and the orange circle represents 800 meters or a 10-minute walk around that grocery store. And we discovered that only 25% of residents live within walking distance of a grocery store. And that's as the crow flies. If you take into account the more fine-grained neighborhood or street network, it's actually reduced down to 16%. That was helpful for us to understand the dynamics of land use. And then the third is distance, and this is just another word for connectivity. So connectivity is the measure of travel distance and availability of alternative routes throughout a network. And this is important because, as you'll see in the diagram on the far right, you have a graphic showing a traditional historic urban grid. The little gray circle, let's say, is a house. The little bus represents a transit stop. The crow fly distance is 175 meters. Using the street network, which is, of course, how people have to travel by foot, by bike, and by other means, is 265 meters, which is about a 3-minute walk or so. So a very walkable distance. The image on the left is showing a more traditional suburban model, which is very common now, obviously. And it's the exact same crow fly distance between home and the transit stop, but taking into consideration the street network, it's actually going to be 1,000 meters or a 12 to 13-minute walk. And we know from research that people typically don't take transit or won't walk to transit stops or make easily convenient shopping trips that fall outside that 10-minute threshold. So the connectivity or the distance is really important. And it can be measured in many different ways. We measured it, it can be measured through average block length or average block perimeter. We looked at it in terms of intersection density. So that's giving some insight into the opportunities to change directions with any given area. And those very dark areas you see on the map are areas where you have 50 or more intersections per hectare, which is considered walkable. And the two areas that kind of meet those thresholds are parts of the city that were developed kind of pre-1940 before the dramatic rise of the automobile. I'm just going to skip ahead a few of these. So we recognize that, the health picture is so much bigger than active transportation. It needs to be more holistic. So we engaged the services of a graduate student at Ryerson University who specializes in spatial data analysis to bring together a more comprehensive picture of well-being and how to, looking ahead to how we would measure it in terms of crafting the actual policies themselves. And we drew heavily, this is before my time, before I was involved with the Healthy Built Environment Alliance, but we drew heavily on that toolkit and found it to be an invaluable resource in crafting a set of indicators. And I'm not going to go through them because they're very similar to what Charito and Lisa walked you through, but essentially we looked at 4 different realms of well-being or health: physical, mental, emotional, social, and ecological. And we linked that back based on our literature review and the research, and including what we discovered in the toolkit around different indicators. And then we applied those indicators to 4 different planning scenarios. So the map on the top left is showing the current population density. So that is a map that you've already seen. And then the map below it on the bottom left is showing dispersed scenarios. This is a business as usual if the city continues to sprawl outward. The map on the top right is a balanced scenario. So this is showing, if we densified or focused new growth in and around some existing neighborhood centers. And the bottom right is focusing it very ambitiously in and around the city center. So all of these scenarios are saying, okay, we've got 60,000 new people coming to Abbotsford, where will we put them? And then we applied our indicators to those scenarios and measured how they would each fare relative to the metrics we had developed. So I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty here, but we looked at grocery stores. So the green are existing grocery stores, and the black lines surrounding them are catchment areas or 10-minute walk, real travel distance around those grocery stores. And then we worked with Colliers, a real estate sub-consultant, to help us understand what sort of market, what sort of residential density would be required to create new grocery stores based in our new growth scenario where we have an intensity of growth happening in and around the city center. So this is showing the most ambitious scenario. And we discovered through working with them that we could there would be the market to sustain 4 new grocery stores. So through this process, we could uncover the possibilities around the city center growth scenario, so the most ambitious growth scenario, where we'd have a situation where 16% of residents currently have access to a grocery store within walking distance, and then that would be increased by 43% to 23% by focusing them strategically in and around this area. We did this similarly looking at areas that were more highly connected, focusing people in and around highly connected areas, improved connectivity by 88%. So 10% of residents currently live within a walking distance of these highly connected areas. Through our ambitious growth scenario, city center growth scenario, it rose to 17%. And so we charted them all out. We looked at a number of indicators. Some of them I've walked through. And the key here, so this is, I don't want you to dwell too much on this table here, but the point we're trying to convey here is that we have at the very top, we have in the today column, existing conditions, and then the dispersed scenarios, this is business as usual, the balanced scenario, which is the more nodal neighborhood scenario, and then the focus, which is more focused on the city center, and then the percentage change. So this is trying to convey how each of those 3 new potential growth scenarios would perform against these well-being metrics and against one another. And what was really important was it was one thing to have this kind of nerdy analysis happening in the background, but then to be able to distill it down into a more bite-sized, accessible engagement platform that allowed residents to understand the trade-offs associated with different growth scenarios and make informed decisions about the policy pathways they wanted to take. So we made it a lot more simple for this online survey. We had different community elements they could weigh in on: walking to groceries, working near home, convenient transit, preserve natural areas. A couple of others that we looked at that were outside of the parameters of the health conversation was the cost of infrastructure. So the difference between the business as usual and the most ambitious city-centered focused growth scenario was $100 million over the life of the process, or the life of the plan. And we also looked at greenhouse gas emissions and could see that the difference between those two scenarios was a 40% reduction per capita GHGs. This allowed people to make informed decisions and to get behind a much more ambitious plan than they might otherwise get behind. And this is just the last slide I'm going to show you here. This is an image of our client, Ruben Kuhl. He was the senior planner and project manager for this process for the city. He had a wonderful team of people who did amazing engagement. And the real key to success for this plan in adopting a very ambitious growth scenario was to bringing the survey and bringing the engagement out to the community. So we brought it out to parking lots, malls, markets, Sikh temples. We did neighborhood walks, citizen circles, workshops with staff and council. We had a pop-up storefront that people could drop in. Over the life of the process, we reached almost 8,000 people. And for me, one of the most powerful moments of the process was at the very end when this plan, after this two-year process was taken forward to council for adoption at the public hearing. We had people lining up from the public to weigh in. And there was a family physician who showed up, and he stood in front of council, and he said he was a supporter of this plan because he felt that it would make the city a healthier place. And so for us, that was a tremendous measure of success. So I'll just, watching the time, the time's up, so I'll just skip through to the end here and leave it at that and hand it over to Terry.
Thanks, Jennifer, and I actually think that Charito is going to be wrapping us up